What unfolds in the Arctic never really stays there. The changes happening at the top of the world are already rippling far beyond the ice, touching global security, trade, and power politics in ways that would have sounded exaggerated not so long ago. This region is heating up faster than any other place on the planet, and as the ice retreats, the Arctic is transforming from a distant frozen expanse into a strategic crossroads that major powers can no longer ignore. Welcome to Political Plot, where we cut through the noise to reveal the power plays shaping American politics. Today we're diving into how the Arctic has shifted from a remote, frozen frontier into a global hotspot where climate change, military power, and competition between major nations are colliding. What happens in the Arctic now shapes security, resources, and influence far beyond the ice. As the climate shifts, the Arctic's value changes with it. Melting ice opens access to territory, resources, and sea lanes that were once locked away. What used to be viewed mainly through the lens of science and environmental protection is now increasingly framed through security and influence. Nations are not just watching the Arctic, they are moving toward it, competing quietly, and sometimes not so quietly for position, leverage, and future advantage. The Arctic is not an empty wilderness. Several countries hold land within the Arctic Circle, forming a complex geopolitical puzzle that includes North America, Europe, and Eurasia. During the Cold War, this region was seen as a potential shortcut for missiles and bombers, a silent route between rival superpowers. Military infrastructure expanded, especially in the far north, turning ice and tundra into part of a global standoff. When the Cold War eased, there was a conscious effort to step back, to imagine the Arctic as a space of cooperation rather than confrontation. That vision gave birth to a period where Arctic states focused on research, environmental protection, and dialogue. Scientific stations appeared, not only run by Arctic nations, but also supported by countries far from the polar circle, all trying to understand how changes in the far north could shape weather, oceans, and economies across the globe. For a while, the Arctic was held up as an example of how rival states could work together without constant tension. That sense of exception did not survive recent global shocks. The invasion of Ukraine shattered many assumptions about security in Europe and beyond, and the Arctic was pulled back into the center of strategic thinking. Borders that once felt remote now resemble front lines. Military activity increased, alliances shifted, and long quiet skies and seas saw renewed patrols and exercises. The Arctic once again became a place where power is tested rather than merely discussed. For Russia, the region is deeply tied to national defense, hosting critical military assets and serving as a launch point for advanced weapons testing. At the same time, Western countries have expanded their own presence, conducting large-scale drills and reactivating specialized forces trained to operate in extreme cold. The result is a region where forces operate closer to one another, raising the risk that a single miscalculation could spiral into something far more serious. The Arctic is also where global rivalries overlap. The partnership between Russia and China has added another layer of complexity. Joint patrols and coordinated flights send signals that cooperation between these two powers is not confined to warmer seas. China, though geographically distant, sees the Arctic as essential to its long-term ambitions. It speaks of itself as a near-Arctic actor, seeking influence through investment, research, and partnerships that support its broader global strategy. Yet this ambition is not universally welcome. Communities and governments in the Arctic are cautious about becoming overly dependent on any single external partner. Projects branded as development opportunities sometimes raise concerns about control, influence, and long-term costs. China's presence has grown most clearly through collaboration with Russia, especially in energy projects made more feasible by shrinking ice cover. The melting ice itself is the quiet driver behind much of this competition. As sea ice thins, new shipping routes become possible, at least for limited periods. These routes promise shorter distances between major markets, tempting companies and governments alike. In reality, the Arctic remains harsh and unpredictable. Narrow seasonal windows, dangerous conditions, and a lack of infrastructure make it far from a reliable alternative to established global shipping lanes. Beyond shipping lies the deeper lure of resources. The Arctic is often described as one of the last great untapped reserves of energy and minerals. Beneath the ice are vast quantities of gas, oil, and critical minerals that modern economies depend on. Access to these resources could reshape supply chains and reduce dependence on dominant suppliers elsewhere. But extraction in the Arctic is slow, costly, and risky. The environment is remote, the weather unforgiving, and skilled labor scarce. Despite these obstacles, interest in the Arctic continues to grow. Every retreat of the ice hints at new possibilities, and every possibility attracts competition. What was once a region defined by cooperation is now increasingly shaped by rivalry, suspicion, and strategic calculation. Not long ago, the Arctic was described as a place of low tension at the top of the world. Today, that description no longer fits. The far north is still cold, but politically and strategically, it has never felt hotter.